Viper, report. Do you have eyes on the HVT? Over. The radio crackled, slicing through the ringing silence of the ridgeline. No answer. Just the hiss of static and the distant rhythmic thumping of enemy DSHK heavy machine gun fire echoing off the canyon walls below. Viper, this is Havoc 1 actual. Say again. Status? Lieutenant Miller's voice was tight, the professional calm fracturing at the edges. Down in the valley, the SEAL team was pinned behind a crumbling mud wall, dust geysers erupting around them as rounds chewed up their cover. They were blind without their overwatch. She's gone, LT, Chief Breaker called out, reloading his M4. I saw the impact on the ridge, a 12.7mm round. It took her head off. There was mist. Miller clenched his jaw, dirt gritting between his teeth. Damn it. We're on our own. Collapse the perimeter. We move to extraction point Bravo. Forget the overwatch. Click. High above on the jagged crest, a gloved hand twitched in the dirt. Blood, thick and dark, pooled rapidly under a smashed ballistic helmet. The radio earpiece, dangling by a frayed wire, buzzed again. Moving to Bravo, taking heavy fire. We are combat ineffective. The fingers curled into the soil, clawing for purchase. She wasn't dead. Not yet. And she could hear them dying. 36 hours earlier, Forward Operating Base Keystone, northern Syria. Location, Forward Operating Base, Keystone, northern Syria. Time, 14 Zulu, ROE. Current status, green. Self-defense only until theater insertion. The air conditioning unit in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, rattled like a dying engine, fighting a losing battle against the stifling desert heat. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, CLP gun oil, and the sharp, metallic tang of testosterone. Chief Petty Officer Valerya Valkyrie Petrova stood in the back of the room, her spine fused to the plywood wall. She kept her arms crossed, her expression a practiced mask of indifference. She wasn't one of them. She knew it. They knew it. Around the central map table, the men of SEAL Team 4, call sign Havoc, adjusted their gear. They were big men, bearded and tattooed, moving with the easy, predator-like grace of apex carnivores who had spent too many years at the top of the food chain. All right, settle down, Lieutenant Elias Miller said, stepping into the light of the projector. He was a man of sharp angles and tired eyes, the kind of officer who led from the front and carried the weight of every casualty in the gray of his temples. Intel has confirmed the location of target Obsidian. He's holed up in a compound in the Akhdar Valley. Miller tapped the map. A laser dot danced over a jagged topography of contour lines. It's high ground, 8,000 feet. Thin air, steep angles. We insert via halo, patrol 3 clicks to the target, secure the HVT, and exfil via helos at LZ Bravo. Standard snatch and grab, Chief Breaker muttered, from the front row. He was the platoon chief, a man built like a vending machine with a sledgehammer for a personality. He turned, his gaze drifting past Miller to the woman in the back. Except for the luggage, the room went quiet. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the unspoken doubt that had followed Valerya since she arrived in country. Valerya didn't flinch. She locked eyes with Breaker. Her eyes were a startling pale gray. Ghost eyes. If the luggage is too heavy for you, Chief, you can leave it on the runway. A few low chuckles rippled through the room. Breaker's face tightened. Stow it, Miller ordered, his voice cutting through the tension. Chief Petrova is attached to us for a reason. That valley is a sniper's paradise. We need eyes that can reach out and touch someone from a kilometer away. She's the best long gun asset JSOC could spare. We have snipers, LT, Breaker argued, though his tone was respectful. Tex and D-Bar are qualified. Tex and D-Bar are door kickers who can shoot straight, Miller corrected. Petrova is a pure scout. She reads the wind like you read a nudie mag. She's our overwatch. End of discussion. Miller looked at Valerya. For a second, the professional veneer slipped, revealing a flicker of concern, or perhaps warning. Petrova, you'll be detached from the main element. You'll take the High Ridge sector north. It's solitary. If you get compromised up there, we can't get to you quickly. I work better alone, sir, Valerya said, her voice smooth and cool. Let's hope so, Miller said, turning back to the map. Because according to the latest SIGINT, Obsidian has hired protection, Chechen mercenaries, and there are rumors of a counter-sniper operating in the valley. Call sign the Butcher. He uses a 12.7 mm. If he sees you first, you won't hear the shot. Valerya looked at the map, memorizing the elevation lines, the choke points, the kill zones. She felt the familiar itch in her fingertips, the anticipation of the recoil. She knew the team saw a woman, an outsider, a liability. She would have to prove them wrong, or she would die up there on the rocks. We step off at 200, Miller concluded, killing the projector light. Check your gear. PID, positive identification, is mandatory on all engagements. No cowboy shit. Dismissed. As the men filed out, shoulder-checking each other and murmuring operational shorthand, Miller held back. He waited until the room was empty, save for Valerya. He walked over to her, stopping just outside of personal space. The dynamic shifted. The rigid hierarchy softened into something more complex. You pushed Breaker, Miller said quietly. He pushed first, Valerya replied. He's protective. He's lost guys. Miller looked down at her. Val, that ridge. The temperature is going to drop to -10 tonight, and you'll be static for at least 6 hours. I brought a sweater, she said, a faint, dry humor touching her lips. Miller didn't smile. He looked at her hands, then her eyes. Just keep your head down. I need you to cover us, not be a hero. I'm not a hero, Elias, she said, using his first name for the first time that day, her voice barely a whisper. I'm just the insurance policy. Yeah, Miller said, turning to the door, the mask of command sliding back into place. Let's hope we don't have to file a claim. Valerya watched him leave. She reached down and touched the polymer stock of the Mk-22 advanced sniper rifle leaning against her pack. The metal was cold. It was the only thing in this world that had never lied to her. She hoisted the pack, 50 pounds of gear settling onto her shoulders. The weight felt good. It felt like purpose. Outside, the sun was setting over the Syrian desert, painting the sky in violent shades of bruised purple and blood red, a prelude to what was coming. Location, 25,000 feet above the Syrian border, Chuk Akhdar Valley. Floor time, 02 Hugshasar Zulu ROE, strict silence, weapons tight, engage only if compromised. The ramp of the C-130 yawned open, revealing a maw of absolute darkness. The air inside the cargo hold was sucked out, replaced by a screaming wind that tasted of ice and ozone. Valerya checked her oxygen mask, the rubber seal tight against her skin. Beside her, the Men of Havoc team were hulking silhouettes, red tactical lights bathing them in a sinister glow. They were ghosts waiting to be born. Miller gave the signal. One by one, they vanished off the ramp. Valerya stepped into the void. Gravity took her. The world became a rush of wind and adrenaline. She stabilized her fall, arching her back, checking the illuminated altimeter on her wrist. 20,000 feet, 15,000. The mountains below were black teeth waiting to chew them up. At 4,000 feet, she pulled the cord. The chute snapped open with a violent jerk, arresting her fall. Silence rushed back in, sudden and absolute. She navigated the canopy toward the designated drop zone, a narrow shelf of rock kilometers from the target. She hit the ground with a practiced roll, shedding the chute and burying it under loose shale within 90 seconds. "Havoc Actual, this is Viper. Boots on deck," she whispered into her comms. "Copy, Viper. Regroup at Rally Point Alpha," Miller's voice came through, clear and clipped. The hike began. It was a brutal ascent. The Akhdar Valley was not just a geographic feature. It was a fortress of granite and scree. The air was thin, starving the lungs of oxygen. Chief Breaker took the point, setting a pace that was punishing, bordering on sadistic. He was testing her. He wanted to see if the luggage would drag. Valerya didn't complain. She didn't ask for a break. She adjusted the weight of her pack, shifting the MK-22 sniper system, and matched his stride. Her legs burned, and her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. But she kept her, breathing rhythmic, controlled. In for 4, out for 4. Through the phosphor-green lens of her night vision goggles, NVGs, the world was a grainy, monochromatic dreamscape. Every rock cast a long, unnatural shadow. 2 hours in, the terrain narrowed into a goat path flanked by boulders. This was a natural choke point. Breaker signaled for a halt. He scanned the path ahead, his weapon light invisible to the naked eye but blazing like a spotlight under NVGs. He signaled clear and moved to step forward. Valerya saw it. Not the wire itself. It was too thin, likely fishing line painted with matte gray, but the disturbance in the dust. A tiny, unnatural pile of rocks at the base of a scrub bush to the left. "Hold!" Valerya didn't whisper. She hissed, surging forward. She grabbed the handle of Breaker's plate carrier and yanked him back. The big seal stumbled, turning with a snarl, his weapon coming up instinctively. Valerya ignored his aggression. She dropped to one knee, pointing a gloved finger at the space shin height across the path. "Tripwire." Breaker froze. He lowered his head, flipping down a magnifier on his helmet. He traced the line she indicated. It ran from the rocks to a rusted Soviet-era F-1 grenade wedged in a crevice. The pin pulled, the spoon held in place by the tension of the wire. If he had taken one more step, the shrapnel would have shredded his femoral artery. Silence stretched between them, heavier than the packs. Miller moved up, crouching beside them. He looked at the grenade, then at Valerya. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. He tapped Breaker on the shoulder and signaled for the EOD tech to bypass the trap. As they moved past the death trap, Breaker paused next to Valerya. He didn't apologize. He didn't thank her. He just gave a single, curt nod. It was enough. They reached the split point an hour later. The main element would descend into the valley floor toward the compound. Valerya had to climb higher, to the jagged spine of the ridge overlooking the target. "Radio check," Miller said, his voice barely audible over the wind. 5 by 5, Valerya replied. Miller looked at the path she had to take. It was steep, exposed, and lonely. "Call it in when you're set. Don't engage unless we are compromised. You are our eyes, Val, not our trigger." "Understood." "See you on the other side," Miller said. He hesitated, his hand hovering near her shoulder before dropping to his side. The team melted into the shadows of the ravine. Valerya turned her back on them and began to climb. The isolation hit her immediately. Down there, they had each other. Up here, there was only the wind, the cold, and the ghosts of the mountain. She was alone, just the way she told herself she liked it. Location: Ridge 714, overlooking the Akdar Valley. Time 0430, Zulu, ROE, observe and report. Fire only on command. The climb had taken everything she had. Valerya lay, prone in the dirt, her chest heaving against the cold ground, waiting for her heart rate to drop. She was 600 meters above the valley floor, tucked into a crease of the mountain that God had forgotten and the devil had designed for ambush. She didn't move for 10 minutes. This was the soak in, letting the environment accept her presence. A shifting rock, a startled bird, a silhouette against the skyline. Any of these could get her killed before she even unsheathed her rifle. Satisfied that she was unobserved, she began to build her nest. She chose a cluster of gray, jagged boulders that offered natural shadow. Slowly, with agonizing patience, she cleared the loose gravel, creating a flat platform for her body. She didn't raise her head. She worked by feel, keeping her profile lower than the surrounding scrub brush. She pulled the Mk-22 advanced sniper rifle from its drag bag. The weapon was a masterpiece of engineering, chambered in .338 Norma Magnum, a round that could punch through engine blocks at 1,500 meters. She extended the bipod legs, settling the heavy barrel into the loophole she had created between two stones. She draped a sniper veil over the scope and her head, breaking up the human outline. Now she was just another rock. Valerya brought the optic to her eye. The world magnified 25 times. The green phosphor of her night vision revealed the compound below in ghostly detail. It was a fortress of mud brick and concrete surrounded by poppy fields. She pulled out her Kestrel weather meter. The wind was tricky here, swirling through the canyons. 4 miles per hour, full value left to right. She dialed the correction into her turret. Click. Click. Havoc actual, this is Viper, she whispered, the bone conduction mic picking up the vibration of her jaw. I am set. I have eyes on the objective. Copy, Viper. We are holding at the release point. 5 mics out, Miller's voice replied. It sounded tinny, distant. Valerya began her scan, sector by sector, left to right, near to far. She saw a guard smoking a cigarette on the roof, the ember flaring white-hot in her thermal overlay. She saw a dog sleeping by the gate. She saw the mundane details of life that would soon be shattered by violence. It was a strange intimacy, watching men who would be dead in an hour. Suddenly, headlights cut through the darkness to the north. Actual, hold position, Valerya hissed. Vehicle movement, North Road. A convoy of 3 Toyota Hilux Technicals and a black SUV wound its way up the valley track. They weren't running blackout lights. They were arrogant. Valerya tracked the lead vehicle. It stopped at the main gate. Men poured out. Not the ragtag militia they expected. These men wore matching fatigues and carried AK-103s. Discipline, formation. The rear door of the SUV opened. A man stepped out. Even from this distance, the posture was unmistakable. Actual, I have visual on Obsidian, Valerya reported, her pulse remaining steady. He just arrived, but he's not alone. She adjusted the focus ring. The men surrounding the warlord formed a tight diamond formation. They scanned the ridges, her ridge. She stopped breathing. Say again, Viper? Miller asked. I count 25 packs, plus the static guards. Total strength is over 40. And I see, heavy weapons. She traversed the scope to the rear truck. Mounted in the bed was a DSHK 12.7mm heavy machine gun. A weapon that could tear through cover and turn a human body into mist. They just doubled their numbers, Elias, she said, breaking protocol. And they have a DSHK. If you breach that gate, you're walking into a meat grinder. There was a long pause on the radio. The wind howled through the rocks, carrying the sound of slamming car doors up from the valley. "We're too close to abort," Miller said finally. "If we pull back now, they'll spot us. We have to hit them fast before they settle in." Valerya looked at the heavy machine gun down below. The gunner was checking the feed tray. He looked bored. "That gunner is my priority," she said cold. "If he gets on that trigger, you're all dead." "Copy," Miller said. "Wait for my signal. On my mark, you take the gunner. We take the breach." Valerya settled the crosshairs on the gunner's chest. He was lighting a cigarette. He had no idea that a woman 600 meters away was measuring the beat of his heart against the trigger brake of her rifle. The stakes had just skyrocketed. This wasn't a snatch and grab anymore. It was a siege. Location: Ridge 714, Objective Anvil, time 04:42 Zulu ROE, hostile intent confirmed, avoid collateral damage. The world narrowed down to the mill dots in her scope. Valerya's breathing was a shallow, controlled rhythm, syncing with the beating of her heart. Down in the valley, the DSHK gunner was still smoking, unaware that his life was being measured in seconds. "Havoc, holding at the breach point." Miller's voice crackled, tight and whisper quiet. "Waiting on your initiation, Viper." Valerya adjusted her aim. The crosshairs hovered over the gunner's sternum. But then, movement. A door to the left of the heavy machine gun truck swung open. A woman stepped out, carrying a basin of water. A child trailed behind her, tugging at her dress. They walked directly between the truck and the gate, right into the primary kill zone. "Check fire! Check fire!" Valerya hissed, her finger freezing on the trigger guard. "Civilians in the open, woman and child 5 meters from the DSHK." "Copy, holding," Miller replied immediately. "Damn it, we're losing the darkness, Val." "I see them," she whispered. The distance was immense, but the clarity of the optics made it intimate. She could see the pattern on the woman's hijab. If Valerya missed the gunner by 3 inches to the left, the bullet would pass through the truck bed and strike the child. She waited. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Her muscles ached from the tension. The gunner finished his cigarette and flicked the butt away. He turned to climb back onto the truck bed. The woman and child finally moved toward the main house. "Civilians clear," Valerya reported, her voice flat. "Target is mounting the gun." "Execute," Miller ordered. "Go loud." Valerya exhaled half a breath. The world stopped. She squeezed. The MK-22 kicked back into her shoulder. A solid, suppressed thump that disrupted the dust around her. It took nearly a full second for the bullet to travel the distance. Through the scope, she saw the gunner's chest explode. He was thrown backward off the truck bed, dead before he hit the ground. "Gunner down," she called. Simultaneously, a massive flash illuminated the valley floor as the SEALs detonated the breaching charge on the main gate. The concussive boom rolled up the canyon walls a moment later. "Havoc is inside! Go, go!" Breaker's voice roared over the net. The compound erupted into chaos. Tracer fire stitched the air as the mercenaries reacted. The SEALs flowed through the smoke like wraiths, their suppressed carbines coughing rhythmically. Valerya worked the bolt of her rifle, chambering a fresh round. Clack, clack. She scanned the courtyard. A fighter appeared on a balcony with an AK-47, aiming down at Miller's stack. She fired. The fighter crumbled, tumbling over the railing. "Balcony clear," she murmured. For 3 minutes it was a symphony of violence. The SEALs were efficient, brutal. They swept the courtyard and moved toward the main building. "Target building secure. Moving to extract the HVT," Miller reported. The tension in his voice had eased slightly. They were winning. Valerya scanned the perimeter, looking for squirters, enemies trying to flee or flank. The poppy fields were quiet. The road was empty. It was too easy. The thought nagged at her. 40 men. She had killed 2. The SEALs had dropped maybe 10. Where was the rest of the security detail? She swung her scope to the west, scanning the terraced slopes that overlooked the compound's left flank. The shadows were deep there. Then she saw it, a glint, not a scope, but the reflection of moonlight on a barrel. Then another, and another. A line of heat signatures materialized from behind a stone wall on the hillside, 300 meters above the SEALs but below her position. They weren't fleeing. They were setting up an L-shaped ambush. "Havoc! Contact left! West Ridge!" Valerya screamed into the mic, abandoning the calm sniper persona. "Multiple contacts! RPGs!" "Say again," Miller shouted. The side of the mountain erupted. 3 rocket-propelled grenades streaked down from the West Ridge, slamming into the courtyard where the SEALs had just regrouped. Dust and fire engulfed the team. The radio filled with static and screams. "Ambush!" Breaker yelled. "Man down! We have man down!" Valerya racked the bolt, panic flaring in her chest. She had missed them. She had looked, but she hadn't seen. And now the trap had snapped shut. Location: Ridge 714, time 0446 Zulu ROE, hostile fire, free fire zone. Valerya was working the bolt of the MK-22 like a piston. Bang, cycle, bang, cycle. Down in the kill zone, the SEALs were scrambling for cover behind a low mud wall and the wreckage of the burning technicals. The ambush from the West Ridge was withering. RPGs and PKM machine gun fire were chewing up their position. "Suppressing west! I'm suppressing!" Valerya yelled, her voice straining against the recoil. She put a round through an RPG gunner's chest just as he leveled his launcher. He crumpled. She shifted targets. A machine gunner. Bang. A miss. High. She corrected. Bang. Hit. "Viper, we are pinned!" Miller screamed over the net. The background noise a cacophony of explosions. "We can't move. We need you to clear that ridge." "I'm working it." She was firing too fast. She knew it. She was heating up her barrel, creating a mirage in her scope. And more importantly, she was creating a constant muzzle signature. Every shot was a flare saying, "Here I am." But she had no choice. If she stopped to relocate, Havoc Team would be overrun. She slammed a fresh 5-round magazine into the well. As she brought the scope back up, a prickle of instinct ran down her spine. It was a cold, primitive sensation. You are being watched. It wasn't the fighters on the West Ridge. They were too busy pouring fire into the courtyard. This felt different, calculated. Still, she paused, her finger hovering over the trigger. She scanned the terrain above the ambush line, the higher peaks, the places where a predator would sit. There, on a limestone crag across the valley, a kilometer away, roughly parallel to her elevation, a tiny, unnatural reflection. Not a scope glint. Too dull for that. It was the heat shimmer of a massive barrel that had just fired. The math hit her brain a split second before the physics did. The distance was 200 meters. The flight time of a 12.7mm round was roughly 1.8 seconds. She saw the muzzle flash after the bullet was already in the air. "Sniper, take co." She didn't finish the sentence. The world didn't go black immediately. First, there was a sound like the sky tearing apart, the sonic crack of the bullet arriving before the report of the gun. Then, impact. The 12.7mm armor-piercing incendiary round slammed into the top right side of her ballistic helmet. It didn't penetrate the center mass. If it had, her head would have vaporized. Instead, It struck the accessory rail and the curvature of the Kevlar shell at an oblique angle. The kinetic energy was catastrophic. It was like being hit by a freight train. The bullet sheared off the side of the helmet, ripping through the Kevlar, the padding, and plowing a furrow through her scalp and skull. The impact violently snapped her head back and to the left. The force lifted her upper body off the ground. Blood, a massive aerosolized spray of red mist, erupted into the cold night air, illuminated by the moonlight. Her vision fractured into a kaleidoscope of white light and searing pain. The connection to her body was severed instantly. Down in the valley, Chief Breaker looked up just in time to see the impact on the ridge. He saw the dust geyser. He saw the mist. "Viper is down!" Breaker roared, his voice cracking. "Sniper hit! Heavy caliber! I saw the mist! She's gone, LT! She's fucking gone!" Valerya didn't hear him. She didn't feel the ground rushing up to meet her face. She fell limp into the dirt, her hand sliding off the rifle stock, her fingers curling into the dust. The radio earpiece, torn from her ear by the violence of the blow, dangled by its wire, buzzing with frantic voices she could no longer answer. Then the darkness took her completely. Location: Objective Anvil, Main Courtyard Umya, Zo4 48 Zulu ROE, Survival. "Viper is down! I repeat, Viper is down!" Breaker's shout cut through the chaotic din of battle like a knife. He was staring up at the ridge, his face pale beneath the grime of combat. He had seen the pink mist. He knew what a .50 caliber round did to a human head. There was no coming back from that. Miller felt the words hit him like a physical blow to the gut. He risked a glance upward. The ridge was silent. No muzzle flashes, no cool rhythmic cracks of the MK-22. Just the jagged silhouette of the mountain against the stars, indifferent to the loss. "Focus!" Miller grabbed Breaker by the shoulder strap, shaking him violently. "She's gone, Chief. We can't help her. Get that saw up. Cover the west flank." "They killed her, LT," Breaker spat, swinging his squad automatic weapon or saw onto the wall. He squeezed the trigger, sending a long, hateful burst of 5.56 tracers into the hillside. Those motherfuckers! The enemy sensed the shift. The sniper fire that had been keeping their heads down was gone. Emboldened, the fighters on the west ridge surged forward, maneuvering down the terraces. An RPG struck the wall 5 meters to Miller's left, the concussion knocking the wind out of him and filling his mouth with the taste of dust and blood. "Pull back," Miller ordered, coughing. "Collapse the perimeter. Get inside the main structure, now! Move, move, move!" The team bounded backward, covering each other with desperate volleys of fire. They dragged a wounded operator, Tex, who had taken shrapnel to the leg, through the doorway of the warlord's compound. Inside, the air was thick with smoke. They slammed the heavy wooden doors shut and barred them. "Status!" Miller barked, checking his own magazine. He was down to 3. "Tex is stable, tourniquet applied." "Medic," Doc reported, his hands slick with blood. "But he's non-ambulatory." "Ammo is red," Breaker said, his chest heaving. "I've got 2 belts left. We're Winchester on frags." "Comms?" "Jamming." The RTO, radio telephone operator, shook his head, frustration etched into his features. "I'm getting nothing but static on the SAT comm. That counter-sniper. He must have a spotter with an electronic warfare suite. They planned this, sir. They knew we were coming." Miller leaned back against the cold stone wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. The image of Valerya flashed in his mind. Her confident smirk during the briefing. The way she had walked into the darkness alone. "I promised I'd bring everyone home." "Sir?" Breaker said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. We have to go get her body. We don't leave our own. Miller opened his eyes. They were hard, flinty. We can't get up that ridge, Chief. It's 600 meters of open ground, uphill, under machine gun fire. If we try, we lose the whole team. So we just leave her there? To rot? She's dead, Breaker, Miller said, the words tasting like ash. She's dead. Our job now is to keep the living breathing. We hold this building until QRF, Quick Reaction Force, arrives. If we step outside, we die. Breaker stared at him, jaw clenched, eyes burning with a mixture of rage and grief. Finally, he looked away, spitting on the floor. Aye, sir. Outside, the shooting slowed. The enemy wasn't rushing them anymore. They were settling in. They knew the Americans were trapped. They could take their time. Miller looked out a narrow slit window toward the ridge. High above, movement caught his eye. Shadows were detaching themselves from the rocks on the far side of the valley. 2 figures, then 3. They were climbing the goat path toward Ridge 7 and 14. They were going to check the kill. They were going to loot the body. Miller gripped his rifle until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to fire, to drop them, to protect her dignity even in death. But the angle was bad, and he couldn't waste the ammo. I'm sorry, Val, he whispered into the darkness. I'm so sorry. He turned back to his men. Check your sectors. Make every shot count. Nobody dies today, not one more. Location, Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Times 0510 Zulu ROE, survival. Pain was the first thing to return. It wasn't a localized sensation. It was a total, encompassing existence. It felt as if a spike had been driven through her right temple and out the base of her skull. Valerya gasped, sucking in a lungful of freezing air and dust. The sound was ragged, wet, and loud in the stillness. Her eyes snapped open, or rather, one did. Her left eye peeled apart, sticky with coagulated blood. The right eye refused to open, swollen shut under a mask of gore. The world was spinning violently, a nauseating carousel of gray, rock, and black sky. She tried to lift her head, but gravity felt amplified tenfold. Her stomach lurched, and she dry heaved into the dirt, the spasm sending fresh lightning bolts of agony through her skull. Status. Report status. The training kicked in, a robotic subroutine overriding the biological collapse. She couldn't hear. A high-pitched scream, like a jet engine idling inside her head, drowned out everything. Tinnitus, severe acoustic trauma. She moved her hand, the motion jerky and uncoordinated. Her fingers found her helmet. It was split wide open on the right side, the Kevlar delaminated and jagged. She touched her scalp. Wet, warm. A deep furrow running front to back. Bone was exposed, but the skull felt intact. Glancing below, her mind reasoned, sluggish and distant. Deflection. The 12.7mm round hadn't hit her square. It had grazed the helmet, the accessory rail absorbing the initial impact before the round skipped off her skull. An inch to the left, and she would have been headless. As it was, she had a severe concussion, likely a skull fracture, and massive soft tissue damage. She was alive, but she was broken. Valerya rolled onto her side, fighting the vertigo that threatened to throw her off the mountain. She looked down at her rifle. The Mk-22 lay a few feet away, covered in dust. It looked like it belonged to someone else. Then, the vibration. She felt it through the ground before she heard it. Thump, thump, rhythmic impacts. She tried to focus her good eye. Her vision swam, doubling and blurring. She blinked, tears clearing the blood. Below her, in the valley, she saw flashes. Muzzle flashes, The battle was still raging. Her team, Miller. She reached for her radio earpiece. It was gone, ripped away. She clawed at her chest rig, finding the push-to-talk PTT unit. The wire was frayed, but the light was green. Receive only? She pressed the earpiece against her good ear, straining through the tinnitus. Checking the bodies. Hold the door. Ammo red. They were alive. But they sounded desperate. They sounded like men writing their last will and testament. I have to move. I have to help. She tried to push herself up. Her arms trembled uncontrollably. Her equilibrium was shattered. The horizon tilted 45 degrees to the left. She collapsed back into the dirt, groaning. Just stay down, a voice whispered in her mind. You're dead. They think you're dead. Just close your eyes and let it go. It would be so easy. The pain was unbearable. The cold was creeping into her bones. Crunch. The sound cut through the ringing, close, very close. Valerya froze. She stopped breathing. It wasn't the wind. It was the distinct sound of a boot crushing gravel. She turned her head, the movement agonizingly slow, scraping her cheek against the sharp stones. Her limited field of vision scanned the approach to her nest. 10 meters away. A silhouette. He was moving cautiously, weapon raised. An AK-74 with a thermal optic. He was hunting. He was coming to check the kill, to confirm the sniper was dead and take a trophy. He took another step, then another. Valerya's right hand drifted to her belt. Her sidearm, the suppressed SIG P226, was there. But could she draw it? Could she aim? Her hands were shaking so bad she could barely make a fist. The figure stopped 5 meters away. He said something in a language she couldn't hear over the ringing, laughing softly. He relaxed, lowering his rifle, confident that the pile of bloody gear and the motionless body was nothing more than a corpse. He stepped closer. A heavy combat boot, caked in dried mud, stepped into her peripheral vision. It stopped inches from her face. He was standing right over her. Location: Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Time: 5:15 Zulu, ROE. Kill or be killed. Silence is mandatory. The boot nudged her ribs. It wasn't gentle. It was a kick, designed to elicit a groan or a reflex from a dying animal. Valerya forced every muscle in her body to go limp. She held the breath in her burning lungs, willing her heart to stop pounding against her ribcage. The pain in her head was a blinding white noise, but fear was a cold, clarifying bucket of water. The enemy scout grunted. He said something in Arabic. Dismissive, casual, he was convinced. She heard the rustle of fabric as he crouched. He was getting close. He wanted something, a trophy, her weapon, her patch. Valerya opened her good eye a fraction of a millimeter. Through the slit of her lashes, she saw him. He was young, bearded, his face smeared with camouflage paint. He had slung his AK-74 over his back to free his hands. That was his mistake. He reached out, his hand grasping the strap of her chest rig. He tugged, trying to flip her over. Now. Adrenaline flooded her system, overriding the concussion for 3 seconds of pure violence. Valerya didn't try to stand. She didn't try to draw her pistol. Her right hand, buried in the dust beneath her hip, gripped the hilt of the Gerber strong-arm fixed blade she kept sheathed on her belt. As he pulled her upward, she used his momentum. She coiled her core and exploded upward, not away from him, but into him. Her left hand shot up, grabbing the collar of his tactical vest, pulling his face down toward hers. Her right hand drove the blade upward in a savage, jagged arc. She aimed for the gap between his chin and the top of his plate carrier. The neck. The blade sank home. It hit something hard, cartilage or bone, then slid deep into soft tissue. The scout's eyes went wide, filled with sudden, terrified shock. He tried to scream, but only a wet, gurgling rasp escaped his lips. He collapsed onto her, his full dead weight pinning her broken body to the rocks. Panic flared. He was heavy, smelling of sour sweat and cheap tobacco. He thrashed, his hands clawing at her face, striking her injured helmet. Each blow sent shockwaves of nausea through her brain. The world spun. Black spots danced in her vision. Ah, she thought. Her teeth gritted so hard, they felt like they would crack, just die. She twisted the knife. Warm blood washed over her gloved hand, sticky and hot. The scout's thrashing slowed. His grip on her vest loosened. His legs kicked the dirt rhythmically, then stopped. Silence returned to the ridge, broken only by the high-pitched whine in Valerya's ears and her own ragged, gasping breath. She lay there for a long time, trapped under the corpse. She was drowning in the smell of copper and death. She had to move. If she stayed here, the cold or the shock would kill her. With a groan that started deep in her chest, she pushed the body off. It rolled away, face up, eyes staring blankly at the indifferent stars. Valerya rolled onto her stomach. She vomited again, nothing but bile and acid this time. She wiped her mouth with a trembling hand, smearing blood across her cheek. She looked at her legs. They were still attached. She wiggled her toes. Movement. Good. She checked her arms. Bruised, weak, but functional. She looked at the Mk-22. It was 5 meters away. It might as well have been 5 miles. Get up, she told herself. Miller needs you. She couldn't stand. The vertigo was too severe. So she crawled. She dug her elbows into the sharp scree, dragging her body forward inch by inch. Her head throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a hammer striking an anvil. Thump, thump, thump. She reached the rifle. Her fingers closed around the pistol grip. It felt cold, heavy, and familiar. She pulled the weapon back into the loophole she had built hours ago. She checked the action. The bolt was closed. The optic was covered in dust. She used her thumb to wipe the rear lens of the scope. She pressed her good eye to the glass. The view was blurry at first. She adjusted the diopter, her hand shaking. Slowly the image sharpened. The compound, the smoke, the flashes of gunfire. They were still fighting. They were still alive. "I'm not done," she whispered, her voice a croak that barely cleared her throat. She racked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing from her last shot before she died. A fresh round slid into the chamber. She wasn't Valerya Petrova anymore. She was a ghost, and ghosts are hard to kill. Location: Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Time: 05:25 Zulu ROE. Engagement authorized. Priority: imminent threats. The scope was a tunnel. The rest of the world was black at the edges, a vignette of pain and unconsciousness threatening to close in. Valerya pressed her cheek welled against the stock of the Mk-22. It hurt. Everything hurt. The vibration of her own pulse was shaking the crosshairs, up and down, a rhythmic dance of failure. "Focus," she commanded herself. The word echoed in her skull like a shout in a canyon. She couldn't stop the shaking in her hands, so she used the terrain. She loaded her bipod, digging the legs deep into the loose shale, pushing her shoulder forward into the buttstock to lock the weapon frame into the earth. She became a tripod of flesh and bone. Through the optic, the battlefield was a mess of thermal blooms and muzzle flashes. The sun was beginning to hint at the horizon, a gray dawn bleeding into the night, stripping away the advantage of her night vision. She scanned the west flank. The enemy fighters were bold now. They had moved out of the cover of the terraces and were advancing across the open ground toward the compound wall. They were setting up for a final push, a classic, overwhelming assault. "Come on," she whispered, her lips cracked and dry. She found a target, a fighter carrying a satchel charge, sprinting toward the breach in the wall where the seals were holed up. If he threw that charge inside, the overpressure would kill everyone in the room. Range, 400 meters. Angle, 25 degrees down. Wind, negligible. The math floated in her mind, detached and abstract. But her depth perception was gone. With one eye swollen shut, she had lost her binocular cues. The target looked flat, like a paper cutout. She dialed the parallax knob, trying to sharpen the image. The crosshair settled, but it wouldn't stay still. It bounced around the fighter's chest. Embrace the wobble. It was a sniper's mantra. Don't fight the movement. Understand it. Squeeze when the reticle drifts across the target. She exhaled. She pushed all the air out of her lungs until there was nothing left. The natural respiratory pause. Her heart rate slowed for a fraction of a second. The crosshair drifted left, crossing the runner's torso. Now. Her finger broke the trigger. Crack. The recoil was punishing. It felt like someone had hit her fractured helmet with a hammer again. A spike of white-hot agony shot down her spine, nearly causing her to black out. She bit her tongue, tasting fresh blood. But she kept her eye on the scope. Follow through. Down in the valley, the runner with the satchel charge simply ceased to exist as a threat. The 338 round caught him mid-stride, spinning him violently to the ground. The satchel charge flew from his hands, skidding harmlessly into the dirt. For a second, nobody moved. The battlefield paused. The enemy fighters on the slope froze. They looked up at the ridge, at the spot where they had seen the pink mist an hour ago. The spot where the sniper was supposed to be dead. Valerya worked the bolt. The action was stiff, gritty with dust. Clack, clack. She shifted targets. An RPG gunner kneeling to fire. Breathe. Pause. Squeeze. Crack. The gunner's head snapped back. He dropped the launcher, collapsing backward over his own legs. Down in the compound, inside the smoke-choked ruins of the main house. Lieutenant Miller froze. He was reloading his M4, his face smeared with soot. He heard it. It wasn't the chatter of AKs. It wasn't the sharp crack of the team's 5.56mm carbines. It was a heavy, throaty boom, a distinct acoustic signature that rolled down the canyon walls like thunder. He looked at Breaker. "Did you hear that?" Miller asked, his voice hoarse. Breaker looked up, eyes wide. "That was a 338, sir. That was a Lapua." "She's alive," Miller whispered. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. Hope, sharp and terrifying, surged in his chest. "She's alive." On the ridge, Valerya didn't know they were talking about her. She didn't care. She was a machine now. Pain was just data. Exhaustion was just a variable. She found a third target, a squad leader pointing instructions. Crack, he dropped. 3 shots, 3 kills in under 20 seconds. The enemy panic was palpable. They started shouting, pointing at the ridge. They began to scramble for cover, their assault formation breaking apart. They were fighting a ghost, and nothing is more terrifying than the dead coming back to kill you. "Havoc Actual, this is Viper," Valerya rasped into the dead air, knowing she couldn't transmit but needing to say it anyway. "I am still in the fight." She cycled the bolt again. The brass casing pinged off the rock beside her face, steam rising from it in the cold morning air. She wiped the blood from her eye with her sleeve and settled back in. Location: Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Time: 0532 Zulu ROE, free fire, defense of friendly forces. The secret was out. Down in the valley, the confusion had curdled into a frantic, chaotic aggression. The enemy commander, realizing his men were stalling, screamed orders that drifted up the canyon walls. They weren't retreating. They were surging. "All units, suppress the ridge! Kill the shooter!" Valerya didn't need to understand the dialect to understand the tactic. A wall of lead began to lift toward her position. Green tracers snapped over her head, cracking like whips. Rounds impacted the rocks around her nest, sending stone splinters spraying into her face. She didn't flinch. She didn't duck. To duck was to lose the sight picture. To lose the sight picture was to let Miller die. She settled into a rhythm that defied the mechanics of a bolt-action rifle. It was a violent dance of hand and eye. Bang! Recoil slammed into her shoulder. Rack. Her hand flew to the bolt, ripping it back, ejecting the brass, slamming it forward. Acquire. Her eye found the next heat signature. Priority 1, explosives. A fighter broke cover from behind a rock wall, an RPG-7 resting on his shoulder. He was aiming at the wooden doors of the compound. Valerya led him by a foot. The trigger broke. The round took him high in the chest. The RPG launcher fell, the rocket striking the ground and detonating instantly. The explosion vaporized the gunner and knocked 2 riflemen near him off their feet. Rack. Load. "One down," she whispered, the words lost in the ringing of her ears. Another RPG team appeared on the left flank, using the smoke from the explosion as cover. They were moving fast, bounding between cover. Valerya traversed the gun. The heavy barrel was hot now, radiating waves of heat that made the air in front of her scope shimmer. She had to look through the mirage. She fired. A miss, just inches over his head. The round sparked off a boulder. The gunner stopped, dropped to a knee, and sighted in on the compound. "No," Valerya snarled. She worked the bolt with a savagery that threatened to jam the action. She didn't wait for the perfect breath. She didn't wait for the heart rate to settle. She fired on instinct. The bullet struck the gunner in the hip. It wasn't a kill shot, but it shattered his pelvis. He screamed, dropping the weapon, writhing in the dust. Combat ineffective. Rack. Load. Down in the compound, the SEALs were witnessing a miracle. Miller was firing through a loophole, his M4 hot to the touch. He saw the RPG teams dropping one by one. He saw the enemy advance falter. The suppressive fire from the ridge was precise, devastating, and relentless. "She's clearing the lane," Miller yelled over the roar of gunfire. "Breaker, get the saw up on the roof. She's buying us time. Don't waste it." "Moving!" Breaker roared. He scrambled up the internal stairs, kicking open the roof access door. He slammed his machine gun onto the parapet. From the roof, Breaker had a front row seat to Valerya's work. He saw the puffs of dust on the hillside every time she fired. "Give 'em hell, girl," Breaker muttered, unleashing a torrent of 5.6mm fire into the stalled enemy infantry. But the tide was turning against Valerya. She had killed 5 men in 2 minutes. The enemy knew exactly where she was now. They stopped trying to rush the house and turned their attention upward. A DSHK heavy machine gun, mounted on a technical that had maneuvered to the far side of the valley, began to chug. Thump, 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 thump. The rounds were massive. They chewed up the ridgeline, creeping closer and closer to her nest. Boulders the size of watermelons were shattering into dust. Valerya pressed herself into the dirt. A round struck the rock inches from her face, the concussion feeling like a slap. Dust choked her. She couldn't see. She rolled onto her back, gasping for air. Her head was swimming. The adrenaline was fading, and the pain was returning with a vengeance. Her vision was tunneling, black edges creeping in. I can't stay here, she thought. They have me dialed in. But if she moved, she stopped shooting. If she stopped shooting, the RPGs would come back. She rolled back onto the rifle. She couldn't see the DSHK through the dust and smoke. She was firing blind, aiming at the muzzle flashes. Bang! Rack! Bang! She was empty. Her hand reached for a fresh magazine. Her fingers were slick with blood. Her own and the dead scouts. She fumbled. The magazine slipped from her grasp, sliding down the scree out of reach. Damn it! She hissed. She grabbed her last magazine, 10 rounds. That was it, 10 rounds to hold back an army. The DSHK fire intensified. They were walking the rounds right onto her. She could feel the impacts vibrating through her chest. She slammed the magazine home. Come and get me, she whispered. Location, Ridge 714, the sniper nest, time 0540 Zulu ROE, survival, establish comms. The silence was worse than the noise. Valerya lay flat against the earth. The MK-22 pulled tight into her shoulder. The DSHK heavy machine gun had paused, either reloading or cooling the barrel. The sudden absence of the terrifying thump, thump, thump left a void filled only by the screaming tinnitus in her head and the ragged sound of her own breathing. She needed to talk to them. She needed to tell Miller that her ammo count was critical. She needed to tell him that the west flank was soft, but only for a moment. She reached for the transmit button on her chest rig. She pressed it. Havoc? Viper? She tried to croak. Her voice was a wet, broken rasp. Even if she could speak, the boom microphone on her headset was gone, sheared off by the bullet that had nearly killed her. All she had was the PTT push-to-talk button and a receiver earpiece jammed into her ear canal. She could hear them, though. Negative on air support. Fast movers are 20 mics out. We are on our own. The RTO's voice was panicky. Keep fire discipline tight, Miller's voice cut in, steady as a rock, though Valerya could hear the strain underneath. Watch the ridge. If that sniper is still up there, we need to know. They didn't know if she was alive or if the shots from earlier were just a dying spasm. Valerya pressed the PTT button. Click. Static washed over the net. Did you hear that? Breaker asked. Open mic. Check your keys, Miller ordered. Someone is hot micing. Valerya pressed it again, rhythmically, distinctly. Click, 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 click. She waited. Down in the smoke-filled compound, Miller froze. He held up a hand, silencing the RTO. He stared at the radio handset. Do it again, he whispered. Up on the ridge, Valerya closed her eyes. She focused her mind, pushing past the pain that throbbed with every heartbeat. She began to key the mic in Morse code. It was slow, agonizing work with numb fingers. V, I, P, E, R, Viper. The letters spelled out her call sign in the static bursts. Miller's eyes widened. A look of fierce, terrible relief washed over his soot-stained face. He keyed his mic. Viper, this is actual. I hear you. I read you 5 by 5 on the clicks. You can't talk? Valerya keyed twice. Click, click. No. Are you combat effective? Click. Yes. Are you compromised? Click. Yes. Can you hold? There was a pause. A long, terrifying pause where the only sound was the wind howling over the open channel. Click. She lied. She didn't know if she could hold. She had 10 rounds, She had a concussion that was making her brain swell against her skull. She had one working eye, but she wouldn't tell him that. "Copy, Viper," Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "Listen to me. We are prepping to break out. We need you to cover the extraction to the LZ, but you need to conserve. Do not engage until I give the command. Do you copy?" Click. "Good girl," Miller whispered, forgetting protocol. "Stay with us, Val. Just stay with us." The connection was a lifeline. It was a thread of intimacy woven through the electronic noise of war. For a second, Valerya felt the cold seep out of her bones. He knew she was there. He was coming for her. She shifted her position, wincing as her bruised ribs scraped the rock. She scanned the valley floor, looking for threats that could stop the breakout. Her eye caught movement, not on the perimeter, but further back, near the tree line where the technicals were parked. 3 men were unloading heavy crates from the back of a truck. They were setting up a metal tube on a base plate. A mortar. Valerya's blood ran cold. A 60mm or 82mm mortar required no line of sight. They could lob explosive shells directly onto the ridge, dropping them into her nest like basketballs into a hoop. The DSHK had been direct fire. She could hide from it. Indirect fire. There was no hiding from gravity. They were adjusting the bipod legs. The gunner was holding a round, preparing to drop it down the tube. "Actual!" Valerya keyed frantically. Click, 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 click. "Viper? What is it?" She couldn't explain. Morse code was too slow. She couldn't say mortar. 800 meters north. She did the only thing she could. She racked the bolt of the MK-22. She settled the crosshairs on the mortar team. The distance was extreme, nearly 900 meters, and she was out of practice, broken and shaking. If she missed, the mortar would fire. If the mortar fired, she was dead. She keyed the mic one last time. A single long hold. A goodbye? Or a promise? She released the button. Her finger moved to the trigger. The mortar gunner lifted the shell to the lip of the tube. Location: Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Time: 0555 Zulu ROE. Disruption of command and control. The mortar gunner's hand was high in the air, the teardrop shape of the 82mm high explosive shell hovering over the mouth of the tube. In Valerya's mind, time didn't just slow down, it liquefied. She was dying. She knew it with the same clinical detachment she used to judge wind speed. The pressure inside her skull was immense, a vice tightening with every beat of her heart. Her vision had narrowed to a pinhole, the periphery consumed by a static-filled gray fog. She looked through the scope. The numbers on the reticle didn't look like numbers anymore. The TBI was cross-wiring her sensory processing. The windage didn't look like 1.2 mils left. It looked purple. The elevation didn't feel like clicks. It felt like the taste of copper. "Don't think," she told the broken computer of her brain. "Feel." The distance was 914 meters. The flight time would be nearly 2 seconds. The gunner began to lower his hand. Valerya squeezed the trigger. Crack. The rifle bucked, slamming into her bruised shoulder, but she didn't feel the pain anymore. She only felt the recoil as a dull thud, distant and muffled, as if she were underwater. She watched the flight of the bullet in her mind's eye. It arced high over the valley floor, fighting gravity and the spin drift of the Earth's rotation. The round arrived. It didn't hit the gunner. It hit the base of the mortar tube just as the shell was released. The kinetic energy of the 338 slug shattered the bipod legs and kicked the tube violently to the right. The shell, already committed to the drop, struck the lip of the angled metal and bounced out, tumbling harmlessly into the dirt. The mortar team scrambled backward, terrified by the clang of metal on metal and the sudden destruction of their weapon. "Mortar down," Valerya mumbled, her lips barely moving. She cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. Down in the valley, the rhythm of the battle shifted instantly. The suppressing fire from the DSHK hesitated. The enemy fighters, seeing their heavy support neutralized, faltered. Through the gray tunnel of her scope, Valerya saw him, the commander. He was standing behind a low, crumbling wall near the mortar pit, shouting into a radio handset, trying to rally his men. He was smart. He kept his head below the parapet, exposing only his hand and the radio. He thought he was safe behind 12 inches of sun-dried mud brick. He was wrong. Valerya adjusted her aim. She didn't aim for the visible hand. She aimed for where his chest would be, hidden behind the wall. She knew the ballistics of the .338 Norma Magnum. It was designed to punch through body armor at a mile. A mud wall was nothing more than concealment. It wasn't cover. Her vision blurred. The gray fog was eating the center of the image now. She blinked, forcing her eyelid open with sheer will. One shot, she thought. Make it count. She exhaled, emptying her lungs of air she couldn't afford to lose. The reticle settled on the blank face of the brick wall. Send it, the rifle roared. The bullet crossed the valley. It struck the wall, exploding a cloud of red dust out the front side. It didn't stop. It mushroomed slightly, carrying a cone of spalling debris with it as it exited the backside of the bricks. It took the commander in the center of the chest. The impact threw him backward as if he'd been yanked by a cable. He landed on his back, the radio flying from his hand, the chest cavity destroyed. The enemy fighters near him froze. They looked at their leader, then up at the mountain. The fear was total now. They weren't fighting a soldier. They were fighting a force of nature that could see through walls. "Target. Down," Valerya whispered. She tried to rack the bolt again. Her hand slipped. She tried again, hooking her fingers over the handle and using her body weight to pull it back. The empty casing ejected lazily. She looked at the brass scattered around her. She counted them in her head. 25. 25 confirmed kills. A platoon's worth of men. A wave of thirst hit her then, sudden and agonizing. It felt like her throat was lined with sandpaper. She reached blindly for the hydration tube on her shoulder strap. She found the bite valve and sucked. Nothing. Just air. She squeezed the bladder on her back. Flat. It had been punctured during the fall or slashed by shrapnel. She dropped the tube. A dry, rasping laugh escaped her throat. It sounded like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Of course," she whispered. She was bleeding inside her skull. She was surrounded by an army, and now she was dying of thirst. She keyed the mic. Click, click. "Actual," Miller's voice came back instantly, urgent and terrified. "Viper, report. That was a hell of a shot. The mortar is down." She didn't have the energy to click back. She just let the static hum. "Viper? Val?" She rested her forehead against the cool rubber of the scope eyepiece. She was so tired. The gray fog was warm now. It invited her to sleep. "Not yet," the soldier in her screamed. "Not until they are out." She forced her head up. She blinked the gray away. 7 rounds left. Location, Ridge 714, the sniper nest. Time, 06:05, Zulu ROE. Defense of non-combatant assets, aircraft. The sound of salvation was a rhythmic, thumping bass note that vibrated in the marrow of Valerya's bones. From the south, rising over the jagged teeth of the mountain range, a dark shape materialized against the gray dawn sky. A MH-60M Blackhawk, painted in matte black, banked hard into the valley. Havoc Actual, this is Knight Rider 26. We are inbound hot. 30 seconds to dust off. The pilot's voice crackled over the open net. Valerya forced her head up. The movement made the IDOM world tilt dangerously, threatening to spill her over the edge of the cliff. She bit her lip until it bled, using the sharp sting of pain to anchor herself to consciousness. Down in the courtyard, Miller and the surviving members of Havoc team were moving. They were dragging Tex, the wounded operator, toward the open ground designated as the landing zone. "Pop smoke," Miller ordered. A canister hissed, spewing thick green smoke to mark the wind and the center of the LZ. The Black Hawk flared, its nose pitching up as it prepared to settle into the dust. It was a moment of vulnerability. The helicopter was a massive, stationary target. Valerya scanned the perimeter. Her eye felt like it was filled with sand. The enemy fighters had pulled back, broken by the sniper fire and the loss of their commander. The valley seemed quiet. Too quiet. Movement flashed in her peripheral vision. From the alleyway behind the burning main compound, a white pickup truck roared into view. It had no markings. The bed was covered with a tarp, but the suspension was bottomed out, sagging under immense weight. Armor plating had been crudely welded over the windshield, leaving only a narrow slit for the driver. It wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating directly toward the green smoke, toward the hovering helicopter. "Vehicle VBID, South Road!" Valerya tried to scream, but her voice was nothing but a whisper. She keyed the mic. Click, 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 click. Miller didn't need the warning. He heard the engine revving. "Wave off! Wave off!" Miller screamed at the pilot. "VBI'd! Incoming!" The Black Hawk pilot applied full collective, trying to lift the heavy bird back into the air, but momentum was against him. The truck was closing the distance fast. 200 meters, 150. The SEALs on the ground opened fire. Carbine rounds sparked uselessly off the improvised steel armor of the truck. It was a suicide run. A rolling bomb designed to kill everyone in the valley. Valerya watched the truck grow in her scope. She had one chance. The engine block was protected by the welded steel. The tires were run flats. The only weak point was the driver. But he was behind a slit of armor no wider than a cigarette pack, moving at 60 miles per hour, bouncing over rough terrain. It was an impossible shot. It was a shot that required divine intervention. Valerya didn't pray. She calculated. She tracked the vehicle. She swung the heavy barrel of the Mk-22, moving past the target to establish the lead. Speed estimate, 80 kph. Distance, 700 meters. Angle, quartering away. Her body was numb. She couldn't feel her hands. She couldn't feel the rifle. She was simply an eye and a will. The truck crossed the 100-meter line. The helicopter was just feet off the ground. Valerya stopped tracking. She moved the reticle to a spot of empty dirt in front of the truck, an ambush point. She waited for the truck to drive into her crosshairs. 3, 2, 1. She squeezed the trigger. Crack! The rifle slammed into her shoulder for the last time. The recoil impulse was the final straw for her battered brain. Her vision went black instantly. She didn't see the bullet punch through the narrow viewing slit. She didn't see the driver's head snap back, his hands jerking the wheel violently to the left. The truck swerved. It missed the LZ by 10 meters, slamming into the stone wall of the compound at full speed. The detonator triggered. A massive sphere of orange fire expanded outward, consuming the truck and the wall. The shockwave ripped through the valley, flattening the grass and staggering the SEALs on the ground. The helicopter, caught in the buffer of the blast, swayed violently but held its hover. Debris rained down like hail. On the ridge, the shock wave arrived 2 seconds later. It washed over Valerya, a physical hand shoving her down into the dirt. Dust and gravel buried her. She lay still. The ringing in her ears was absolute now. Silence. Then vibration. Stronger this time. The wash of rotor blades. She forced her good eye open one last time. Below, the Black Hawk had landed. The SEALs were throwing techs onto the floorboards. They were scrambling aboard. They were safe. Valerya let out a breath she felt she had been holding for hours. Her fingers uncurled from the pistol grip of the rifle. Job done. The darkness wasn't scary anymore. It was welcoming. It was soft. She let it take her. Location, Ridge 714, the sniper nest time. 6:15 Zulu ROE, rescue operation. The main rotor of the MH-60M sliced through the smoke that lingered over the valley. Down below, the QRF had swarmed the compound, securing the prisoners and the intelligence. The battle for the valley was over. The battle for Valerya Petrova was just beginning. "Put us down on that shelf, now!" Miller shouted over the intercom, pointing to the jagged spine of rock where the sniper fire had originated. "Sir, it's too narrow for a full landing," the pilot argued, fighting the crosswinds. "Then give me a one-wheel hover. Get me on that ground." The Black Hawk flared hard, the tail boom swinging perilously close to the cliff face. The port side wheel touched the granite. The bird shuddered, holding its position against gravity and wind. Miller didn't wait for the crew chief's signal. He unclipped his safety line and jumped. He hit the ground hard, stumbling on the loose scree. Breaker followed him, a medic bag slung over his shoulder, his face set in a grim mask. They ran toward the pile of rocks that formed the sniper nest. The scene that greeted them was a tableau of violence. First, they saw the enemy scout. He was lying face up, his eyes staring blindly at the sky. A gruesome knife wound in his neck. His AK-74 lay in the dirt. "Clear!" Breaker shouted, kicking the rifle away. Miller scrambled over the dead man and dropped into the depression behind the rocks. "Val!" She was there. She was slumped forward over the MK-22, her cheek resting on the stock as if she were sleeping. But there was no peace in this image. She was half buried in rock dust and spent brass casings. So many casings. They glittered in the morning sun like gold coins. Her helmet was a ruin. The right side was shattered, revealing matted hair and dark, coagulated blood that coated the entire side of her face and neck. Miller fell to his knees beside her. He was afraid to touch her. She looked broken, like a porcelain doll dropped from a great height. "Doc, get up here!" Miller screamed, his voice cracking. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. "Val, can you hear me?" There was no movement, no rise and fall of the chest. "She's gone, LT," Breaker whispered, staring at the wound. "Look at her head. Nobody survives that." Miller ignored him. He placed his fingers against her carotid artery, pressing deep into the neck. His own pulse was hammering so hard in his fingertips he couldn't tell if he felt anything. Then, a flutter. Weak. Thready. But there. "She's alive," Miller roared. "She has a pulse." Valerya stirred. A low, agonizing moan escaped her lips. Her good eye fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. She tried to lift her head, but the weight was too much. Her lips moved. No sound came out. Miller leaned in close, putting his ear to her mouth. "Don't try to talk. We got you. You're going home." She grabbed his wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, a desperate, claw-like clutch. She pulled him down an inch. "Did..." She wheezed, a bubble of blood forming on her lips. "Did we get him?" Miller looked at her, at the devastation on her face, The evidence of the 25 men she had killed to keep them safe. The empty water bladder. The dead scout she had fought with a knife. Tears, hot and unbidden, stung his eyes. "Yeah, Val," Miller choked out. "We got him. We got them all. You did good. You did so good." She exhaled, a long, shuddering sigh. The tension left her body. Her hand slipped from his wrist and hit the dirt. "Crash status!" the medic yelled, sliding into the nest. He took one look at her pupils and cursed. "Blown pupil on the right. Posturing. She's herniating, sir. We need to move her now." "Load her up," Miller commanded, grabbing the drag handle of her vest. They moved with frantic efficiency. They didn't have a litter, so they carried her, Miller taking the shoulders, Breaker taking the legs. They ran back toward the helo, heads ducked against the rotor wash. They threw her onto the floor of the cabin. The medic jumped on top of her, ripping open his kit. "Go, go, go!" Miller pounded on the bulkhead. The Black Hawk lurched into the air, banking hard away from the mountain. Miller sat on the floor, holding Valeria's hand. It was cold. So cold. The medic was working frantically, inserting an airway, cutting away her sleeve to find a vein. "I can't get a line. Veins are collapsed. I'm going intraosseous." He drilled a needle directly into her shin bone to deliver fluids. Valerya didn't flinch. She was staring at the ceiling of the helicopter, her eye wide and unseeing. Suddenly, the high-pitched whine of the portable monitor changed. Beep, beep. Silence. A flat, continuous tone. "She's coding!" the medic screamed. "No pulse! Starting compressions!" Miller watched as the medic laced his fingers and began to slam his weight into Valeria's chest. The brutal physicality of CPR jerked her broken body with every thrust. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Val!" Miller yelled, squeezing her hand until his knuckles turned white. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare quit on me now!" The helicopter sped toward the horizon, a metal bird carrying a ghost who was deciding whether to stay or go. Location: Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland. Time: 6 months later. ROE: Healing. The war was loud, but peace was deafening. Valerya sat in a wheelchair by the window, looking out at the manicured green lawns of the hospital grounds. It was raining, a soft, gray drizzle that washed the world clean. It was so different from the arid, violent dust of Syria. She reached up and touched the black patch covering her right eye. The doctors had saved the globe, but the optic nerve had been severed by the hydrostatic shock of the bullet's impact. The vision was gone forever. Along her temple, a jagged, silvery scar ran into her hairline, marking the place where a titanium plate now replaced a section of her skull. She had headaches. Bad ones. Sometimes her balance failed her, and the room would spin just like it had on the ridge. The Navy called it permanent disability. She called it the cost of doing business. There was a knock on the door, not the tentative tap of a nurse, but 3 solid, rhythmic raps. "Enter," she said. Her voice was stronger now, though the rasp would never fully leave. Lieutenant Commander Elias Miller walked in. He was in his service dress blues, the ribbons on his chest a colorful testament to a career spent in the shadows. He looked older. The gray at his temples had spread. He stopped just inside the door, holding his cover hat in his hands. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a mixture of reverence and sadness that made Valerya want to look away. "You look good, Val," he lied gently. "I look like I got hit by a truck, Elias," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "Or a 12.7mm round." Miller chuckled, walking over to pull up a chair. He sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. "The team sends their best. Breaker wanted to come, but they're spinning up for another rotation. He told me to tell you he owes you a beer, a keg, actually. Tell him to keep his head down, Valerya said softly, and to check his corners. Miller reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a blue velvet box and placed it on the small table between them, next to a plastic cup of water and a bottle of painkillers. The ceremony is scheduled for next week, Miller said. The Secretary of the Navy wants to pin it on you himself. It's the Navy Cross, Val, second only to the Medal of Honor. They don't give those out for participation. Valerya looked at the box. She didn't open it. She knew what was inside. A piece of metal in the shape of a cross. It was heavy, heavier than the rifle. I didn't do it for the medal, she said. I know, Miller said, intense. You did it for us. The after-action report. Val, the ballistics guys are still trying to figure out that shot on the truck. 700 meters on a moving target with a severe concussion and one eye? They're calling it impossible. It wasn't impossible, she whispered, looking back out at the rain. It was necessary. Silence stretched between them. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was the comfortable silence of two people who had seen the edge of the world and come back. I'm being medically retired, she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. I know, Miller said. I tried to fight the board. But with the vision loss, it's okay, she interrupted. She turned to face him, her single gray eye clear and sharp. I'm tired, Elias. I think I've hunted enough ghosts. Miller nodded, swallowing hard. He stood up, placing his hand on her shoulder. He squeezed it, a grounding touch. You're not a ghost, Valerya. You're the reason 20 men are going home to their families this Christmas. You're the reason I'm standing here. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. Thank you. He straightened up, put his cover back on, and snapped a sharp, slow salute. It wasn't a salute to a subordinate. It was a salute to a superior. Valerya returned it, her hand steady. Miller turned and walked out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Valerya picked up the blue box. She opened it. The gold and white ribbon gleamed under the fluorescent lights. It was beautiful. It was useless. She closed the box. Her gaze drifted to the corner of the room. On the shelf, sitting next to a vase of flowers, was her helmet. It was battered, the camouflage paint scuffed and burned. On the right side, a deep, jagged furrow cut through the composite material, the physical record of the moment she died and came back to life. She stared at the dent. It looked like an eye, an unblinking, hollow eye staring back at her. Valerya smiled, a genuine, tired smile. She reached for her cane and pushed herself up from the wheelchair. She walked to the window, leaning against the glass. The rain was stopping. The sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a long golden beam across the hospital lawn. She was alive. It was enough.